Kavod, Yahweh, the glory of the Lord, is the weight of the Lord. The universe is full of weight. There are lesser glories all over the place. There are lesser weights, but there is no weight that is weightier than Yahweh. Kavod, but it's from the same root word. He was heavy because he was taking God's portion, the weight of God, and bringing it to himself, and it was the weight of God that killed him. The Chavod has departed. Eli was judged for his weight, and the weight of God, the greatest weight, left as well. We're going to be in 1 Samuel 4, verses 12 through 22. So hold your spot there. Today I want to talk about weight. In our culture, we say things like, his words carry a lot of weight, or, this is a weighty responsibility, or, I have the weight of the world on my shoulders. I think we've all experienced weight this week. Over this last week, I was in 3 different states filming for work. I started off in Nashville, where I was at an apologetics conference called War of the Worldviews. Basically a conference that focused on the idea of multiple worldviews and which worldview is the one that's true to reality. And if that's true, the Christian worldview, how do we not only know that worldview, but then defend that worldview, which is what every Christian is called to do? Give an answer for the hope that we profess. Very weighty conference, dealing with really weighty things. From Nashville, I flew to New York City because I was able to film in New York City. My boss, Greg Kokel, who runs Stand to Reason, he was invited to a podcast called Diary of a CEO. I had never heard of this podcast before we were going there, but it turns out that it is the second largest podcast in the entire world, just second to Joe Rogan, who still holds the top spot. The subject of the podcast was meaning and purpose. The world is asking questions. What is meaning and what is purpose? How do you define it? He was one of 3 panelists. The other 2, one was a professed atheist named Alex O'Connor, and the other was a guy, they just named him Dr. K because nobody could say his name, but he's this Hindu guy, kind of a spiritualist, but basically an atheist. And Greg Kokel was there to represent Christian orthodoxy and give a biblical understanding, a biblical worldview of meaning and purpose. And I was able to go there and film all that. Listen, the world is talking and asking questions, weighty questions, questions of meaning and purpose. I had left a car in Nashville, so I had to fly from New York after we filmed there for 2 days, flew back to Nashville to get my car, and then drive back to Lebanon. This was Tuesday night, so I got into Lebanon from Nashville at midnight, and then first thing Wednesday morning, back to Springfield on a plane to go to Georgia. It doesn't usually cluster this much, it just happened to cluster really bad this week. And I was going to a conference in Georgia, another student apologetics conference called Reality, where there was about just over 2,000, I think 2,200 high school and college students. And the name of this conference was The Story of Reality. What is real? How did God not only set up his universe, but what is the true story of reality? There's lots of competing stories out there. Weighty questions. And these youth were there to not only be engaged and to be taught the Christian worldview, but again, to know how do we give a proper and adequate defense, right, for the Christian worldview. Because the world is coming at us with tons of questions. And like many of you, I was sitting on the tarmac in Springfield when the news started trickling out. Something's happened. First, when I saw the videos, or what I thought was a video, I wasn't sure. I thought it was clickbait at first because it looked too strange. And I thought, what is this? And this is strange. Then obviously more and more started to come out. And I watched several of the videos, which I don't recommend. And you got to see what happens in real life. And it's a weighty time. And listen, because of my previous employment, I've seen enough death for 2 lifetimes. But this one felt different. This literally, I remember sitting in the plane waiting to take off, and I was just sick to my stomach, like physically ill, which doesn't happen to me typically. But in this moment, I found fascinating is that the world collectively paused for a second. Doesn't happen often. It paused. Listen, the world's murder's not new in the world. This is not an abnormality in that sense. But this one was different, and the world paused for just a second. All of a sudden, real questions are coming out, which is about the weight of eternity. What happens next? How in a moment life can be different. And that's true of everybody in this room. We don't act like that's true, but we all know in the back of our minds that that's kind of true. Not sure we live that way, but we all know, at least academically, that that's possible and that's true. But I go to the conference. So we take off and we go to Georgia. About 20, like I said, just over a couple thousand youth are in this room, beautiful building, filled to the rim. And it's heavy. It's heavy. You can feel it in the air that it's not right. But the conference begins, and the worship band comes out, and as you can imagine, in a big venue, huge feel and just massive sound, and every hand in the place is raised. They're singing hymns, and it is almost deafening how loud everybody's singing. And my role at that conference was to capture snapshots of this thing. So I'm supposed to be on the stage, and I'm filming different parts of the band, or I'm filming parts within the crowd, and so I'm kind of walking. And I'm weaving through the crowd, and I'm just filming, I'm just capturing, unique moments or whatever. And walking, again, thousands of students, and I'm walking through, and I hit an aisle just like this, and I see at the end here, down this aisle, there is a wheelchair. And I look at this wheelchair, stops me in my tracks just for a second, and there's an obviously severely handicapped young man in this wheelchair. And obvious breathing tube, can't speak. And right at this moment, as I'm stopping and I'm just looking just for a snapshot, the crescendo of this hymn that we're singing hits hard, the chorus hits, and I see this deformed hand come up out of this wheelchair, and sounds, not words, sounds, praising God. And I remember thinking, gosh, worship is weighty. Worship is weighty. Did you come here today to feel the weight of what it means to worship the King of the universe and how he thinks about the worship that he's commanded of his people? Or did you come here today to take the weight that's reserved for God and to transfer it to you? We're here today in the presence of the living God to feel the weight of his call on our lives to give him worship. In other words, church is not about you, and it's not about me. Church is about the living God. In God's sovereignty, I think we all hold on to sovereignty in here. He brought us to this passage today. I always knew where I was going to preach. Wasn't going to change our service set for any of the kind of past events. And I find it fascinating that God brought us to the passage that he brought us to today. It has a lot to say about our current setting. But I want to remind us really quickly of where we're at in the story. Remember in the story that Israel and the priestly line of Eli are fully corrupt before God. God had a prophecy through Samuel that Eli and his entire house would be eliminated because of their sin. And God gave a proof. You want to know how, Eli, I'm going to eliminate? That you can believe what I say about your house is true. Both of your sons are going to die on the same day. That'll be the indicator that what I said is going to happen is actually going to happen. Israel goes out to war against the Philistines, and they lose an initial battle. And then they regroup, and then they bring the Ark of the Covenant from Shiloh, and they bring it to the scene thinking that this will ensure when our counterattack happens that we'll have victory. After all, as the argument would go in their minds, who could defeat the living God? What army could defeat the living God? Bad theology has real-life consequences. Real-life consequences. Well, Israel in the story suffered an incredible and shocking defeat. Eli's sons were both killed as the prophecy went, and the Ark of the Covenant was captured. That is where we are in the story where we're going to pick up today. When we start in verse 12, that battle just finished. Okay? Okay. Let's go into the text. Verse 12. A man of Benjamin ran from the battle line and came to Shiloh. Remember, Shiloh's where the Ark of the Covenant was and where Eli resides. A man of Benjamin ran from the battle line and came to Shiloh the same day with his clothes torn and with dirt on his head. He's in mourning. When he arrived, Eli was sitting on his seat by the road watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. And when the man came into the city and told the news, all the city cried out. When Eli heard the sound of the outcry, he said, "What is this uproar?" Then the man hurried and came and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were set so that he could not see. I'm going to stop there for a second. Remember what we said in the past about the books of Samuel, that often when a physical description is given, it is indicative of a spiritual reality. When someone is, in other words, when someone is described physically, it's usually consistent with their spiritual state. Eli's old and he's blind, but look at how it says it uniquely. He could not see, verse 15. Now Eli was 98 years old and his eyes were set so that he couldn't see. That's interesting. If we recall from earlier, this is the same Eli who, when Hannah was praying, could not see that she was not drunk, but she was actually giving worship to Yahweh. He mistook it, and so he had to be corrected. In other words, his spiritual sight had to be corrected by Hannah to say, I'm not drunk, I'm praying, I'm worshiping. Then he goes into the priestly role and gives a blessing. And what we find here, all the way, here a couple chapters later in 4, his physical blindness now has caught up with his spiritual blindness. That's all. His eyes are set now. He's not seeing dim anymore. He's dark. In other words, his fate is sealed. I think that's what we're seeing here. 16. And the man said to Eli, I am he who has come from the battle. I fled from the battle today. And he said, how did it go, my son? He who brought the news answered and said, Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has also been a great defeat among the people. Your two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured. As soon as he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell over backwards from his seat by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died, for the man was old and heavy. He had judged Israel 40 years. Interesting bit of detail here. Really interesting. Again, just to reiterate, the prophecy has been fulfilled, and it's fascinating how God allows him to know that the prophecy was fulfilled before the prophecy, then the death sentence comes to him. He gets to hear of his son's death, and then he dies. But there's something else going on here that I want to show you, and here's the problem. It's not readily apparent in English. It becomes a little more clear in Hebrew. So I just want to do like a very, very small instruction moment on some Hebrew. But I want you to see the weight, and I think that's the point, the weight of God's glory fell on Eli. Now, if you go to Israel and you learn language like we do, you go into language learning school, the first thing that you will find out about Hebrew is that it is a consonant and a root language, meaning Just about every word, there's probably some exceptions, but most words in Hebrew have 3 consonants at their root that are a base word. Okay? 3 consonants. And then from that word, then you make little modifications and you can change or modify the word meaning. Okay? So, for example, if you have, this is a kaf, this is a bet, and this is a dalet. All this is 3 consonants in the Hebrew alphabet. This is a K sound. By the way, this is also the famous ch sound. So k or ch. This is a B or a V. Don't lose me here. And this is just a D sound. Okay, here's what's interesting about Hebrew. How do you know when you make the k or the ch? Because by the way, if you get that wrong, it changes the meaning of the word. Well, here's how you know. By the way, the same thing with B and V is if they put a little dagesh, a little dot, right here. This now becomes a k versus, well, if I can do this, I should have checked this. Versus that is now a ch. The problem with Hebrew, especially for if you're learning, is that Hebrew is an unpointed language, meaning it's written only in consonants. So you just see those consonants and you don't know, is that a k or is that a ch? And I'm not sure. And as somebody like me learning the language is saying, who in their right mind would make a language like this? This is outrageous. Like, how could you ever know or be expected to know? Until I start to realize we do this in English all the time. All the time. For example, what is this word? Anybody? Out loud? Read. Are you sure? How do I know it's not red? Okay, words that I don't know because we got homeschoolers. How do I know I can't say I read or I read? How do you know the difference? Context. You know it in the sentence. The sentence demands, right? Hebrew's the same way, which is very frustrating if you're learning a language. Very frustrating. This is what's happening here. Now, this word right here, so forget the dagesh. This word right here, let's forget that, is, is Ichabod. Ichabod. Ichabod, simple word, Ichabod. This word means wait. Ichabod. Ichabod means wait. Now, we see examples of this word, Ichabod, this root word, all over the Old Testament. Okay? We see, let me give you just a couple of examples that you'll probably recognize immediately right from just when I tell you about them. And that is this. You don't have to turn here, but this is in Exodus 4:10. Famously, Exodus 4, this is after the burning bush. Moses was told, you're going to go into Egypt and you're going to get my people, in essence. God says, I've heard their cries, I'm sending you. And then Moses, remember, starts giving all these lists of, I can't do it because of this, I can't do it because of this, can't do it because of this. But in verse 10, he makes a statement, which I find really interesting. And he says, I'm not eloquent. And then he actually says, I am slow of speech and of tongue. And what word does he use? Ichabod. Ichabod peh. Peh is how you say mouth. Ichabod peh. What is he saying? My mouth has weight. And Ichabod lashon. Lashon is just tongue. Ichabod lashon. So my mouth and my tongue are weighty. They don't move well. I can't speak, so they naturally translate it slow of speech. Right? Another one. Exodus, same book. 17 verse 12. This is another famous battle. If you remember when they fought the Amalekites, famous scene when Moses was told that as long as he held his hands up, that the Israelites would be winning the battle against the Amalekites, but the moment that his hands went down, they would start to lose the battle. And what does it say? Moses' hands grew weary. And what word is used? Ichabod. His hands, and then, by the way, because it's plural, you have to again add little modifiers because it's not just a single. So it's chavadim, but his hands were weighty. They became heavy. Okay? So my point in saying all this is a critical root word. And why does any of this matter? Well, I'll tell you why. Because, well, let me actually tell you one more thing real fast. When you have this, right, we know that this is heavy, or weight. This is another fascinating part. If I was to modify it just one more time and add a little vowel here, which is a vav, this, by the way, gets changed from a ch to a ka, and we get the word kavod. Kavod. So chaved, kavod. You don't have to remember any of this except to say it is the root for glory. By the way, you can see how that works, right? Kavod, Yahweh, the glory of the Lord, is the weight of the Lord. The universe is full of weight, right? There are lesser glories all over the place. There are lesser weights, but there is no weight that is weightier than Yahweh. Kavod, but it's from the same root word, right? Here, that same root word. Chavad, which means weight. So kavod. Now, why do we bring all of that up? I'll tell you why. When we get to verse 18, and this is the point here, as soon as he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell over backwards from his seat by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died. So what do we call this? Judgment, right? So we'll just put judge. He was judged. For the man was old and chavad. Interesting. He was heavy. He was weighty. Now, do you see, initially there's going to be a play on words here that pops off when you're in Hebrew. It loses it in English in the translation. Now, why do we care about this? Eli was heavy because he took the weight of the Lord. How did he do that? Remember earlier in the story, what were Eli's sons doing with the sacrifices? Yes, sir. Well done. What was that good meat related to, or that first portion? Do you remember? Well done. Okay, it's okay. No? The fat. They were taking the fat. And by the way, is it by accident that Eli is later described as heavy? No. I think that gives indication that he was just as involved with his sons doing that as he was involved just like his sons. He was heavy because he was taking God's portion, the weight of God, and bringing it to himself. And it was the weight of God that killed him in judgment. He misappropriated the weight meant for God, and he was chavad, he was heavy, and that's what broke his neck. That starts the discussion. By the way, it gets deeper. There's a Hebrew play on words here. He was judged for taking the heaviness of God onto himself. Let's continue. 19. Now his daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant, about to give birth. And when she heard the news that the ark of God was captured and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed and gave birth, and her pains came upon her. In other words, she goes right into labor. And about the time of her death, the women attending her said to her, "Do not be afraid, for you have borne a son." But she didn't answer or pay attention. And she named the child Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel, because the ark of God has been captured, and because of her father-in-law and her husband." And she said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured." All right. Now, I want to look at this with you, because again, words matter here. We already saw that Eli was chavad, heavy. And we know that from that root, 3 consonants, if you modify it, it can be kavod, which is glory, the heaviness of God. If you see this name in Hebrew, what do you suppose it is? Kavod, glory, but they have to negate it. You have to do a negative. Oh, not that, sorry. Kavod. Without glory. No glory. She named the child Ichabod, saying, the glory has departed, that's for sure. The weight of God has departed Israel. But think about this, same root word. You're right that the weight departed. Eli departed and God departed. The glory, the weight, the chavad, right? Same root. Here we are. The chavad has departed. Eli was judged for his weight, and the weight of God, the greatest weight, left as well. Kavod. The glory has departed from Israel because the ark of God has been captured. And then the rest of that. We see that God takes his glory very, very seriously. The weight of sin, think about this, the weight of sin from the priestly line, that's Eli and his sons, has departed, and they incurred the wrath and the judgment of God for making themselves the focal point. They made the weight about them. And they were chavad, they were heavy, but the kavod of God killed them, judged them. What's the point of all of this? Here's, I think, how it applies to our day. Because I think this is an interesting week that this message would come up, right? Who could plan this? We didn't plan this. God plans this. What do you think he's saying here? Because I think that it relates to us. Let's take it a couple different ways. I think first off, you could say, sin will be allowed to seemingly flourish by God for a time. Remember, we talked about this. If you were in ancient Israel during Samuel's day, think of the destitute situation here. Think of how corrupt everything is. How could you ever undo this? This is an impossibility if you're just an ancient Israelite. And in our day, sin seems to be flourishing. Why does God allow such things? Seems to be flourishing for a time. But I'll tell you this, we know this sovereignly. When God says it's over, it will stop instantly, and the judgment of God will come, and it'll come like a flood. Perhaps like an entire priestly line being killed in an afternoon. When God's judgment falls, it falls. God is not out of control. And here's the point. When it comes to glory, kavod, when it comes to his weight, God is jealous for his own glory. He will not share his glory with anybody or anything in this universe. It is the point of this universe. And here's what I would say to us, to you specifically. God has given you circumstances and settings in your life right now that you are to give him glory with. Question: are you transferring that glory, that weight of God, to other things, making it maybe about you? So many people go to church thinking it's about them. So many people go to work thinking it's about them. So many people raise a family thinking it's about them. So many people, they chase hobbies, they pursue dreams, they do all these ambitious things thinking it's about them. But the entire point of the universe, the reason that you're breathing in here today, is one singular focus. It's one purpose: the glory of God. If you were to evaluate your life right now, would you find you're a lot more like Eli than you'd want to admit. If you tried to transfer the weight of God, the glory of God, to yourself or to other things. You know, the famous Westminster Catechism asks this question. What is the chief end of man? Famous question. What is the chief end of man? In other words, what's the entire point of mankind? How do you summarize that in a sentence? I thought they did very well. What is the chief end of man? To glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. That's the point. That's the point. And here's my fear. After a week like we've had, here's my fear. You see a lot of troubling things online. I do. My fear is that we look in these kinds of times, this horrifically tough week where the world paused. It doesn't often happen. And if we're not very, very careful, we will transfer the weight of God to a man. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't be a part of that. I will be clear about this. We are here to glorify a man. But that man was the Word who became flesh and made His dwelling among us. That's the point of the universe. We can all be grateful, and I want to be just, again, abundantly clear. We can all be grateful for a life well lived. But listen, Charlie Kirk is not the standard. He's not the standard. Christ alone is the standard. I've heard so many troubling things. In real grief, I understand, we give grace because it's real grief. I get it. But bad theology hurts people. Like, be the man Charlie Kirk was. What? He's a sinner. He's our brother, but he's a sinner saved by grace. I want to be like Christ. I want to be like Charlie Kirk. We can appreciate a life well lived and be grateful that God would use people in powerful ways. Nobody's going to question that. Charlie Kirk is not the standard. We don't look to him. We look to the weight of God. That's the point. That's our goal. At the end of the day, here's a simple question. I want us to think about this question, and I want you to internalize this question. Think about it with me, just in your head, about your personal life. Think with me. Where is the weight right now in your life? And you know what I mean when I say the supreme weight. Where's the weight in your life? If that weight rests in, let's say, your comfort, your family, your reputation, your ambitions, then like Eli, you have shifted glory away from God and brought it to yourself. God does not take that sittings down. God is very serious about His glory. But if the weight of your life rests on Jesus Christ, the entire focal point of this universe, the high point of human history, if your weight focuses on Jesus Christ, then you will live a life pleasing to God. So don't leave today. Here's, I guess, the whole point. Don't leave today. When you think about God's glory, don't leave today thinking lightly. So much of church today is geared around this idea of light, superficial. Feel the weight of God. Don't trade the weight of God for trivial things. We're reminded this week when the veil is kind of torn back that we're temporary. You got a moment in time, a moment. We're going to blink and we're going to all be in eternity. James said we're a vapor. Your life's over. You have a moment. God may give you 31 years. God may give you 50 years. God may give you 10 years, 80 years, 100 years. No matter how many years God assigns to your life, and that's the point, anchor your soul where the true glory belongs. On the Son of God, who came, who died, who rose again, who's now seated at the right hand of the Father, reigning in the universe right now. That's the glory. That's the weight of God. We put our attention, our focus, the glory on the Son of the living God. He's the weight of the universe. He alone is worthy. To Jesus alone, I want to close with this. To Jesus alone. Alone. I don't want to reiterate this point. I don't know if I could enough right now. Not Charlie Kirk. To Jesus alone belongs the eternal weight, the glory, and the honor forever and ever. Amen. That's what Eli got wrong and what we need to get right. Use this time as a wake-up call to feel the weight of the glory of God. And if your life right now, you have trivialized God, you put him in this corner, compartmentalize him, like you can just be over here as spiritual stuff, and then the rest of my life is me, repent immediately. Repent immediately why God gives you a breath, because at any moment he could snatch it away. The point of your existence is the weight and the glory of God.